Yeah, there's a really cool phenomenon where early in the day, or after, we should say after someone's been asleep for a while, for that first 0 to 9 hours of the day, I call this phase 1 just because got to label everything with a name to make it clear. During that time, we know that dopamine, adrenaline, and cortisol, healthy levels of cortisol, are highest in your system in those first 9 hours. You might not wake up quickly, but they're highest. And then those start to taper off, and molecules like serotonin start to predominate. And the way these molecules like dopamine, serotonin, they do a lot of different things. They're involved in tons of things. But we can generally say that they modulate. They're called neuromodulators. They bias the probability that certain brain circuits and areas will be active and certain ones won't. So when dopamine and epinephrine are really churning around in your brain, you're really good at linear types of things like math, organization, working out, sets and reps, this does this, we're going here, itineraries, where there's a right answer and you're just trying to plug and chug. As serotonin and other molecules kick in, which is later in the day and at night, the brain becomes much better at these, I call this phase 2 of the day. They become, so it's like 7 to 16 hours, 10 to 17 hours after waking, so 0 to 9 for phase 1 and 10 to 17 for phase 2. Your brain is much better at nonlinear thinking, creative thinking, brainstorming. I don't know what the writing process, comedy process is for you, but if you're doing anything creative, you're organizing existing things into new ways. You're kind of playing with ideas, and it actually can be beneficial to be slightly sedated. This is actually why so many great writers and musicians and maybe comics have used a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of cannabis to put their brain into that kind of liminal state where you're not super lasered in. You're not looking for the right answer. The right answer just kind of comes to you. And for some people, they have a hard time accessing that when they're in this hyperdrive mode. And jazz musicians, right, famous for abusing a lot of substances because jazz is all about the spontaneous incorporation of notes and et cetera. So I think that late night creativity makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Tim Dillon and I were just having this conversation because Tim is sober. And, Tim used to have a real problem with substances. And he says he does his podcast really late at night. Like, they don't even start filming until, like, after midnight.
Is that why he's got the aviators?
Yeah, but it's also, like, that's sort of his drug, Like, he's sleepy, and he's kind of just, like, half out of it. And, when he puts the sunglasses on, it's almost like he's in an altered state of consciousness, but without having to snort ketamine or whatever the fuck he was doing.
Oh, goodness.
He's just
definitely a healthier approach. That guy used to snort ketamine.
I don't know.
Ketamine's now legal, but please, no, I can't imagine snorting ketamine is good.
Well, ketamine is legal though. You could do ketamine therapies, which are really weird. Like a lot of people are doing them for depression.
Why? So here, I've got colleagues who study ketamine. I've been spending a lot of time trying to understand how this drug works. It's a dissociative anesthetic. So it's like PCP. Mm-hmm. It works by blocking something called the NMDA, N-methyl-D-aspartate receptor, if people want to look that up.
It's very similar, right? Carl Hart was telling me that it's almost the same thing as PCP.
Absolutely. This receptor is a receptor that becomes active only when you're hyper-focused on something, and it has the capacity to create brain change in a very dramatic way. Sort of, because your brain they say, oh, your brain is different 5 minutes after this conversation than was before. That's bullshit. Basically, your brain doesn't change unless it needs to. And that signal of need to comes from something being really intense, really stressful, really exciting, really novel, right? Makes sense, right? Why reprogram the machine unless there's a need? And so you have a chemical signal. Ketamine basically was initially used to block memory formation after trauma. So people would come into the emergency room. Let's just imagine like horrible scenario, right? And someone was just in the passenger seat and watched their closest loved one get impaled on a steering column. That person is in a state of shock, and they're never going to forget what they see. So what do? You give them ketamine, you try and dampen the plasticity, the brain change that would occur to remember that incredibly traumatic event. Now it's being used as a way to bring people into the clinic, or it seems like it is pretty rampant use now, and put people into this dissociative state so that they see themselves having an experience. In fact, I've talked to people who've gone through ketamine trials, and they describe it as watching themselves get out of their own car. They're like third personing themselves. This to me sounds like a horrible state to be in. But
why is that?
I mean, I've been working my whole life to just be comfortable with the body I'm in, and I'd like to stay in it, not because it's always comfortable to be there, but because you know, getting good at that seems to be the key to having a good life, being able to tolerate discomfort. This
But
is
isn't the
about
point-
getting out of yourself.
Yeah, but isn't the point for these people to try to figure out what they're doing wrong with their life so they can look at it objectively as a third party?
Yeah, that makes sense to me, that they would look at, like, for instance, their suicidal depression and say,
Yeah.
you know, that, like, the new agey kind of thing is like, you are not your feelings. That's a tough one for people to incorporate, because when I have really strong feelings, it certainly feels like it's happening inside me. So this is allowing them to get next to their feelings and see their feelings as an experience, not them.
Yeah, I mean, but even when you know that it's definitely happening to you, you know that you are also sometimes not burdened by those feelings.
That's right.
So it's some sort of an external factor, or
Right.
even if it's an internal factor.
Right.
It's a thing other than the core of what you are.
Right. It
Right.
doesn't define you.
Right. It doesn't define you. I think that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out, like, why are they so overwhelming
Yeah.
to the point where they want to leap off of a cliff? Like,
Right.
what is causing that?
Yeah, and it seems to work quite well for intractable depression, as it's called. What's really odd about the fact that it works, at least to me, is that if you look at the other new emerging, very effective treatment for severe depression, it's the exact opposite. It's this incredible work that Matthew Johnson and colleagues are doing out at Johns Hopkins, giving people macro doses of psilocybin.